everyone. Welcome to the South Asia Study Group's second event of this semester. Last event of ours was with Jayashree Bajoria of Indian Human Rights Council. And this time we have Dr. Ahmar Mahboob with us, who will be talking about Pakistani, a language for a divided people. This is a proposition he made in his recent article in Express Tribune, and we have invited him to speak more on the subject. Welcome to the forum, Dr. Mahboob.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you being here. I think that this session is also being recorded, so hopefully we'll have a continuation of this conversation, this discussion.
To start off,
yes,
you recently published an article in Express Tribune and came up with a very interesting and some people might say a wild idea of creating a new language in Pakistan which you call Pakistani. The idea, from what I understood reading the article, was to create across the ethno-linguistic divide in Pakistan a unified language for a divided people. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what exactly the idea is so we can take the conversation?
what I'm saying is recognizing that the language that is the common language of people across Pakistan is no longer what we could call Urdu. Urdu has, of course, a very long tradition. It's got a very long history. It evolved in a certain way. But in Pakistan, as it is often used in different parts of Pakistan, it is not seen as being legitimate Urdu anymore. I'll give you a basic example. Very often in TV dramas, in everyday conversation across Pakistan now, you would hear people say things like, maine khana hai, maine jana hai, instead of mujhe khana hai, ya mujhe jana hai. Now, maine and mujhe is the proper pronominal form in Urdu. Maine is something that is very commonly used by people, perhaps because of the influence of Punjabi. Been acculturated, it has been co-opted, it has been adapted in ways that are relevant to and appropriate for the communities that use it.
Right.
Now, in some ways you can think of that parallel of this as English in a global sort of a level, right? So English in Australia is different from English in the UK. English in Pakistan is different from English in, say, Sri Lanka. At a global level, when you look at English, it's pretty obvious how English has become such a big sort of a system with so many variations used in different parts of the world. But when we often talk about Urdu, we don't see the same thing. Now, that creates a lot of problems. One of the problems is that when we have one form of Urdu as the codified form of Urdu, which is going to be used as a measure of everybody else's language and literacy abilities, a model that is actually no longer current even with many of the mother tongue Urdu speakers of the language, then we have an anachronistic model of language that doesn't reflect how people use the language. So I'm not saying let's create a new language. I'm saying let's understand how the lingua franca of the people of Pakistan, which is based on Urdu but is not Urdu, is used. And to use that understanding of language to create a sense of, create a new way of thinking about this language, and let's call it Pakistani instead of calling it Urdu, for many reasons, and I think we'll go into this conversation later on today. But to create this language called Pakistani that and allow us to do this. Now, when I raise this sort of an idea, yeah, it might appear to be pretty wild, but there are two main sort of reasons why I propose this. One is essentially a sort of a socio-political reason, and I'll talk about that first because I think it's extremely crucial, and hence the title, and that's where the title comes from. A united language for a divided people. So it's in the recognition of the ethno-linguistic tensions that exist in Pakistan and have existed pretty much ever since the country was formed or became independent. Another set of arguments are linguistic arguments. So I'll talk about the linguistic arguments second, and perhaps not as much in detail today, given our audience. But there are two sets of arguments to be made. So an ethno-political set of arguments and a linguistic set of arguments. Now let's look at the first set of arguments, or the issues, not the arguments really. These are the issues that make us think about something of the kind as radical as creating a new language called Pakistani. The first of this has to essentially a reflection on the history of the development of Pakistan itself. Right, and looking at once Pakistan was created, the use of language in terms of policy making and nation building. So the initial idea was that Urdu would unify the populations across Pakistan, as it would symbolically carry the relationship between the language and the religion. So Urdu as a representative of the Muslim people. Now, that in itself is a historically difficult claim to make for a number of reasons, but let's not get into that. Let's say, okay, we accept that that was the reason, and it was sound logic at that time. The fact that it didn't work, and it didn't work from the very go, right? So you have got the East Pakistan with the Bengali language issue, and Bengali language never becoming part of the, Bengali language not being accepted as a national language initially, right, which led to multiple riots. Today we celebrate the world's mother tongue language, Mother Tongue Day, which is celebrated in February, which is a beautiful event and marked by UNESCO and worldwide. Do you know what the basis of that day is? The day that it is celebrated. That is the day when the Pakistani police opened fire on a procession at the University of Dhaka, killing protestants and students. And it was a protest in support of Bengali. That is where the International Mother Tongue Day comes from. That's its history. So it's a great thing that we celebrate it, but as Pakistanis, we should also be ashamed of the fact that the date that was chosen was a day when we committed murder on our own people, who were essentially trying to voice a right for the language.
Can this one shed a light on why exactly Urdu was not able to become a national language?
To a degree, for example, in Bengal, Bengali was already a very established language. Bengal had a very strong educational literacy, sort of, that, what am I saying? Yes, it had a very strong set of literacy practices. They were, and they had their own language, their own culture, their own beliefs. And Urdu to them was just as imperialistic as English. It wasn't a language of the people in that part of the country. And the similar arguments are presented by, for example, the Sindhi nationalists, who also refused to use Urdu, right? Which is, Sindhi is in West Pakistan, which is very much part of today's Pakistan, where people still refuse to acknowledge Urdu as their language. They see it as an imperialist language, and they see it as a language of the Muhajir community that came in after the formation of Pakistan and after the separation of India and Pakistan. They see it as a language that has taken over their rights, their position, their ways of living, and are imposing another layer of imperialism on them. And so there's a resistance to it. And there's always been that resistance. We have ignored it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Now, talking about ignoring it, when we assess this problem, what I'm talking about to you about here is not new. Most people in Pakistan, or people who are interested in issues of Pakistan or South Asia studies, are aware of this history, are aware of how language plays a very crucial part in the political landscape of the country. Now, there have essentially been two broad ways of dealing with it. One of them is actually by my fellow linguists in Pakistan, some very prominent linguists who write extensively in newspapers, give advice to politicians and governments on how perhaps a solution would be to create new administrative regions based on language. So create a Saraiki speaking administrative region, create one for Sindhi, Brui, Rawi, different languages, different parts of Pakistan can have. Whoever wants to claim language as a way of marking their political boundaries can perhaps do that. Now, that's one suggestion that has been made many, many times over the last decades. But does that help? That's my argument. It doesn't. Not only does it not help, but it actually perpetuates the divisiveness that can exist based on ethno-linguistic terms. A lot of time, the divisions that are marked or promoted through linguistic markers or terminology are actually differences in terms of socioeconomic access, right? Development across different parts of the country, access to water, resources, electricity, education, all of those things. And certain people from certain parts of the country feel that they are underprivileged in accessing those networks because they are this ethnicity.
Yeah.
And that ethnicity then gets labeled with language as their ethnic marker. Now, thus accepting that, okay, now we will accept this ethno-linguistic community as its own administrative unit, will that just overnight change, or will that really change the distribution of the socio-economic resources? Those are two different questions, but they get conflated in these sort of discussions, and that's the problem. And trying to make an argument that let's use language to create more administrative regions is actually perpetuating the idea that we can keep creating newer and newer, smaller and smaller community and administrative regions based on essentially what we speak or who we are.
So that kind of goes contrary to what you're proposing in your argument.
Absolutely. So I'm arguing that that way of thinking is actually, and that argument is going to lead us further into divergent and divisive.
So what you're proposing, a Pakistani as a common language, are there any examples or case studies that you can point out where such a thing has happened and it has been successful?
I will talk about it, by the way, okay, because I'm just giving you the first reason, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, sorry, first way of reacting to the first reason,
Sure.
which is the let's create more administrative regions. There's another very powerful discourse that responds to the understanding that language creates disharmony. Language is a problem instead of a resource in Pakistan. And that's essentially the government's perspective, which is doing nothing at all. Not tackling the issue of language, not creating a language policy, not creating a language and education policy, leaving the documents in the education policy extremely vague when it comes to language.
So you're saying that government of Pakistan does not have a language policy at all?
No, it doesn't. And I think it does it consciously because it knows how much of a problem it can be. So rather than trying to tackle it, because the only way it can tackle it is by using divisive community, having divisive groups that have contesting claims. So and as soon as you talk about language policy, all these discourses come in.
Yeah.
And so the government says, let's avoid it, let's not talk about it, let's just keep it going the way it does. That itself, you might say that that's not a policy, but actually that becomes a policy. It's a policy of non-doing anything, which keeps perpetuating again the problems we have. So that's why the idea of creating language that attempts to create a unified voice, right, that is seen as a nation-building project, right? So we're talking about Pakistani as a way of thinking about language policy in Pakistan that is seen as part of a nation-building process. And so sort of rethinking some of the ways that the government operates around it, and also acknowledging the socio-historical differences, socio-economic differences across the country, and understanding how those relate to language to create these things.
Has there been an exercise to do this in Pakistan's history in past 70 years?
Not that I know of. The very idea of creating a new language Pakistani is pretty radical. And it's radical in the sense that people think of Urdu as being the language of Pakistan. But you know, when you're traveling, you and I, others people around here who might come from Pakistan, when we're traveling around the world, very often when people ask you, so you're from Pakistan, you must speak Pakistani. Yeah. So for people outside Pakistan, they already sort of imagine that we speak Pakistani, whereas we know that we speak Urdu or Punjabi or Sindhi or Brahui or whatever languages. So in that sense, that exists for people outside Pakistan, but inside Pakistan doesn't exist. And in terms of a government effort or any group trying to create a policy around it, no, it hasn't happened. It's still very much Urdu-centric. So for example, the Supreme Court decision last year about the use of Urdu in all administrative sectors is essentially an Urdu.
Which wasn't practically successful from what I know, because Urdu didn't have enough vocabulary to to even be operational in terms of court proceedings or in the government work?
I'm not sure if it's not a question, if it's simply a question of is it ready. I think Urdu is ready, if especially in many ways. There are a number of reasons. One is resistance to Urdu. So there are a number of pockets of people and communities who resist Urdu for various reasons. So that's one of the elements, and that doesn't seem to be taken into account. In terms of can you use language in education in Pakistan? Yes, you can. Can you use this in the court system? Yes, you can. Think of Malaysia. Malaysia has used Bahasa Malay. They replaced English with Bahasa Malay over a period of time as the language of higher education, as the language of the court system, as the language of the constitution. So over a period of time, they translated the constitution in Bahasa, and after a certain period of time, the Bahasa version of their constitution supersedes the English version, whereas in the past it was the other way around. So you have examples. You were asking about examples earlier of things like this. I often think about another example, which I think is really good to look at, is the case of Philippines. And it's very different from Malaysia for a number of reasons. For example, Bahasa Malay reflects the name Malay. And Malay, within the Malaysian context, has a lot of privilege tied to it. There's no we don't need to get into all of that right now. So I often prefer to use the example of Filipino, which was a language that didn't exist. In a sense, yes, it was Tagalog that was the dominant language of the people around Manila, which then became sort of Filipino. In fact, most of Filipino really is Tagalog plus a few other features, but essentially it's Tagalog. But they renamed it, right? And this was done in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Yeah. And since that time, Filipino has become the national identity marker, right? So people across the country, they will speak Filipino. They will understand Filipino. They will have literacy in Filipino. So there's lots of things that have happened as a result of the creation of Filipino, right? So you've got the Filipino language as an example, but at the same time, when you create a Filipino language, you also create within it a space for the local languages to exist in harmony. So, for example, in early 2010, I think, or late 2010, sometime around that time, the Philippines introduced what they call Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education, or MTBMLE, which essentially created space for the use of children's mother tongue, regardless of what it was, within the educational context, especially across primary school, for a slow transition into Filipino and English, right? So, in a sense, by recognizing languages of the community, allows us to create policies that can be used for community development, to create a space for the protection of, and not just protection, but actually the growth of minority languages. Yeah. Instead of suppressing them, you create alternative ways of thinking about them. So instead of thinking of language as a problem, which is essentially what the Pakistani government thinks, hence it doesn't do anything about it, we can think of language as a resource. And as a resource, we can tap into this resource to be able to do a lot of things across a range of points.
Could you also comment on the example of India, because that is one example that kind of pops up. It has tons of languages, yet if you go to southern India, you won't see people speaking Hindi. Yeah. And despite of this variation in languages, they have been able to create this Indian identity and a very strong unification of the country. How do you think that their model has been able to work effectively well, while in Pakistan it has had the opposite effect?
Very good question. I'm not an expert on India, really, so I won't be able to answer that part of it as well, I think. But to a large degree, yes, you're right. People in South India, for example, do not speak Hindi. In fact, they resist Hindi, and they don't want Hindi, right? So they want Tamil to grow, or they want their own languages to grow, and they have a strong tradition and literacy in that tradition. So in a sense, India, for example, one of the things that it did initially, and it keeps on expanding that list every once in a while, is that it recognizes a number of languages as national languages. as opposed to Pakistan that only recognizes one. Right? In Pakistan, there's only one national language, which is Urdu. Whereas India recognizes a number of languages as national languages. So it acknowledges that language diversity. Then it acknowledges a range of languages at the proficiency level, provincial languages, or state level. Then it recognizes a lot of languages as scheduled class languages. So there's a list of languages that are recognized legally within Pakistan. Within India. The same is not the case in Pakistan. Like for example, Pakistan is still going through the most recent census, very delayed, but it's happening now. There is a question about language, and I looked up that question in preparation for this. There are only 9 languages listed, right? So there are 9 options to select which language you speak. This includes 2 languages that didn't used to be included. So for example, Brahui is included now. It didn't used to be, right? And then there's this one category called other. So there are 10 options. Option number 10 is other. Yeah. And there are 9 languages. 9 languages does not reflect or capture the linguistic diversity of the country. Okay? Now, when that's the only data that you have on language, then that's the only data that you will use for planning, right, or policy development. So you work, for example, with the Ministry of Planning. So if Ministry of Planning needs data, if you don't have data, or if your data combines categories that are intrinsically problematic, then any policy that you're going to derive based on those numbers can be problematic. But that's not being tackled, right? So that's another difference. So the way that Pakistan deals with language is very different from how historically India has dealt with language, right? And English has been maintained in India to a certain degree, whereas in Pakistan there's very strong resistance against English as well, right? So there are lots of communities that don't accept English as their language in any way case, right? So there's quite a large number of reasons why there's differences. But I think the key thing is the democratic process that recognizes languages.
From what the conversation that we have had so far, it kind of appears that there is no attempt to nationalize the Urdu language, and what you're suggesting, the language Pakistani itself, which is supposed to harmonize this divide between the language. I see there is a lot of implementation and methodological issues on how do you get to that. If you could comment, for instance, if the Prime Minister of Pakistan was to give you a free hand in developing this proposition further, what would be the roadmap? Where do you start? What institutions? What department? How do you harmonize this racial and ethnic divide in Pakistan to start this process of developing a harmonized language?
The first thing is that this is not going to be something that should come from one political party at all. So yes, the Prime Minister can facilitate it in terms of organizing an all-party conference on the issue of language, right? But it is an all-party decision that we need to create a language that we can all identify with, which is Pakistani, right? And that all the political parties agree with that agenda. Because if you don't start with that first step, it will become, this is a PML idea, and therefore other parties will not accept it. It will become equally politicized. So the first step to take is to call an all-party conference with a particular agenda, which the agenda is thinking about language as a resource for national development.
Do you think that there would be an interest within the political parties, for instance, PPP in Sindh, to have Urdu, for instance, or any other language to be a national language, because they have a political capital that they get out of using Sindhi as a language? So what interest do you think would there be for ANP, for PPP, who are now provincial parties more or less, to have a common language? How do you cross that divide?
I think you can make the same argument for Muslim League in Punjab. The Punjabi elites are essentially also elites because they have dominance in Urdu and English, not just through Punjabi. So if they only spoke Punjabi, they wouldn't be able to get somewhere. So that argument can be, yes, placed everywhere in that context, and Urdu plays an important role in it. but it's not the only position to take, right? Because if the main direction that we sort of raise is, okay, we want to create, we want to have an agenda for nation building that incorporates language. Let's explore what that language policy can be. We have to make it we have to develop it as a policy that is cohesive, that everybody agrees upon. So when you talk about Sindhis speaking Urdu, the Sindhis way of speaking Urdu is very different from a Punjabi way of speaking Urdu or a Balochi way of speaking Urdu. We need to recognize all those variations, right? So that after going through that first phase, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. There are no good surveys of language use in Pakistan. I mean, this is sad, but we don't have studies of language variations of Urdu across the country. There are more people doing PhD research on English and English language teaching in Pakistan than there are people doing analysis of Urdu or the spread of Urdu or the use of Urdu as a lingua franca or the variations of Urdu across regions or social classes. We don't have that. We have more people studying the Pakistani English than Urdu across Pakistan. So we need that data. We need an understanding of how this language, let's say Pakistani, which is different from the old Urdu, how is it used? How do people in different parts of the country use it? So that we don't get stuck by saying that when a Punjabi speaks Urdu, they speak bad Urdu. Or when a Pathani speaks Urdu, they can't even differentiate between the gender, masculine and the feminine, and we make fun of them, right? So why do we make fun of these things? Because we take this Urdu as a mother tongue model, which is spoken by a minority of the people in the country, right, as a mother tongue. We take that model of Urdu and then we impose that as the only legitimate way of using language. And therefore, if you don't meet that benchmark, you are not educated, you're not literate. And so you're essentially creating a second and a third class citizenry within your own country based on the kind of Urdu they speak. And at the same time, we have no studies of it. So we need to create that knowledge. We need to understand that and take this with evidence to the group and say, here is the evidence, this is how people across the country use it, here is how we can see it's becoming representative of the country as a whole, so that we acknowledge the variations as part of who we are as Pakistanis, and then further develop the language in a way that can be utilized for science, development, technology. So for example, instead of an Urdu development board spending millions of rupees on creating terminology for science that nobody ever uses, why don't we simply use the words that people already use and incorporate them, accept them as language, as what Pakistani is, and develop it in that sort of a way. Use those as ways of addressing issues of literacy. Why do we need to have a script which is based on Persian-Arabic script when the average Pakistani doesn't differentiate between different sounds? So for example, seen, say, swad. Yes, I agree there are variations in the sounds of these things. Yeah. But for an everyday average Pakistani speaker of Urdu, there is no phonological contrast in Urdu. The contrast exists because there is a historical contrast and it comes from Persian-Arabic sort of context. And that becomes imposed on Urdu speakers across Pakistan when we don't distinguish between those things. So why do we need that representation of those sounds in the Urdu? I'm not saying that we change the Urdu script. The Urdu script should stay what it is. It's the language of Khalid, it has a richness, it needs to stay the way it is. But when we're thinking about Pakistani, we can definitely simplify the script, right? Think about China, what it did with the traditional script and the simplified script. So with these experiments with language in terms of nation building, capacity building, national harmonization, social harmonization, education, development, are not new ideas. People have experimented with these around the world in different ways. And I think we have access to that knowledge, and we have learned things from them that we can perhaps try to avoid. Not that we're not going to make mistakes ourselves, I'm sure we will, but at least we can learn from what has happened in ways and use it.
let me ask you something building on this. Uh, in a globalized world, where we have a global market forces, we have a global movement and trajectory of people, migration. I've recruited for the government of Pakistan and I've recruited for other agencies in Pakistan as well. How much do you think that average layman in Pakistan benefit out of being proficient in Urdu or the language? They don't stand a chance when it comes to the interviews. The recruiters are usually interested in the English language skills compared to the Urdu language skills. So the incentive to actually develop Urdu as a further language, given the fact that the globalization, in the context of globalization, how do you think that shouldn't we just accept English as a language, or for instance, boarding Java as a language and move on, than just going back and trying to develop a language which for many may be obsolete now?
One, language development is organic. Right? So I'm not simply saying that we create something new.
Right.
It's already utilized. It's interesting when you talk about how it might be difficult if somebody doesn't speak English to get a job. That might be in case in some places. But let's say if you are a marketing company and you want to market X product, let's say in Hyderabad, say, will you want somebody who has excellent skills in Urdu or English, or do you want somebody who speaks the language of the shopkeepers who will be buying the product? Right, so we look at advertisement campaigns across Pakistan. How many ads do you find just in English? Yes, there's elements of English in the ads, but there might be code mixing, there might be borrowings, there might be puns that are used to create, advertisement. But it's based around Urdu, right? So to say that Urdu is obsolete is absolutely not true. But what is perhaps what I'm arguing is that it's no longer that Urdu either. It's become Pakistani. It is no longer the Urdu of Mir or Ghalib or even of the 1950s, right? If you look at the history of the development of Urdu, people argue that Urdu developed as a pidgin language. A pidgin language is one where people from different language backgrounds come together in the same place, and because they have a need to communicate, they develop a language, right? So that's the idea. One of the ideas about the development of Urdu, that the root languages already existed, but then there was a group of people who had come together and needed a language, so they expanded the resources that they had. They merged other languages into it. So you've got groups from, you've got words in Urdu that come from Sanskrit, words from Persian, Turkish, Arabic, Sindhi, all these different languages. And the reason is because the history of Urdu is one which has always accommodated different languages. What I'm arguing for essentially is that in some places, in some contexts, that language became stabilized and became extended into literary functions in education and things. But at the same time, the pidginization feature of factors involved in the development of Urdu have not stopped. So when Urdu comes into contact with people who speak Shina and Burshski in the northern areas, or it comes into contact with Saraiki speakers or Punjabi speakers or Hindko, or take any language, Urdu changes again, right? So that process of pidginization, even though aspects of language have creolized and standardized, there are other aspects that are still evolving and changing. And Urdu is too young a language to say that this is the only standard that we're going to have. We need to have a way of thinking about it in a modern sense. We need to reflect what people are doing today rather than what people did 100 years ago, right? And that's really crucial.
Right. Thank you so much. These were most of the questions that I had on the subject.
Yeah.
If you would like to conclude on specifically this issue of Pakistani as a language, and to clarify maybe anything that you have said on how to take it forward, or what might be some of the benefits, we can do that, and we can take questions from the audience.
Well, I'll go back to where I started. Remember, I said I'll give you two reasons, and one is the sort of the political reason for the development of Pakistani, which we talked about quite a bit, and the other was linguistics reason. I didn't really get into the linguistic reason as much, but you can think about language. Any language has variations. And variations are based on how people use the language and who it is that is using it. When it's only a small community of people using a language in one place for one set of purposes, there's a very sort of a strict set of ways in which that language, large area with people who have different first languages and mother tongues and different second languages as well, then the language varies in different ways. It has to accommodate for and it has to reflect the variations that people bring to it. Now, in the context of English, people talk about it in terms of, say, American English or Australian English, and English as a lingua franca, which is the English that people use, say, in Southeast Asia, when one person is Thai, one person is from Pakistan, and a third person is from Italy, and they're all using English, right? People have researched that. It's called English as a lingua franca. There's massive studies of it. But it's similar to what's happening in Pakistan when you've got a mother tongue speaker of Punjabi, one of Sindhi, and one of Pashto, and they're all together speaking in Urdu. Essentially, Urdu is the lingua franca for them, right? So, and then Urdu is not the same as Urdu Mawla, right, or the high Urdu in any way. It's the Urdu of everyday life. So, in that language has changed. So, we need to recognize how Urdu has evolved over the last 60 or so years of the creation of Pakistan, how the creation of Pakistan gave Urdu a new life, in the sense of bringing it to as one of the languages that people speak indigenously in the country, but that as a national language, we are looking at Pakistan.
Thanks for those insights. We are live streaming right now, and we have a couple of questions from our Facebook. But you can start off with the audience over here. If anybody has any questions, we can go with that. And so we can start with you and Regina.
Yeah.
No, you go first. That's
Yeah,
right.
from University of Sydney, you have some priority.
No, I
you can
don't.
start, Regina.
Actually, oh no, I just believe that there's a connection between language and nationalism, as you mentioned as well. So I was thinking whether this lack of Pakistani language reflects, in a certain sense, a lack of nationalism within the country in itself. Can you say something
Sorry,
about
I
it?
missed the last bit.
So it's like you don't have a Pakistani language, as you said, this kind of united language within Pakistan. Does it reflect also lack of nationalism in the sense of culture, all the other things that make a country Pakistani itself? So I was wondering whether, this lack of Pakistani language really reflects something else, that it goes further than the language in itself.
Yeah, to a degree it does, unfortunately. So, for example, if you see this split between East Pakistan and West Pakistan, language played a very important role because it was never symbolically recognized. When you look at ethno-nationalistic movements across Pakistan, they're often linked to language. So it does, to a sense, imply that, yes, in some ways, we don't have a clear sense of Pakistani identity. On National Day, people are waving flags and everybody says I'm a Pakistani, but what does that entail, especially in relation to the language, is a very difficult measure to address. Partly because we don't have the data, or we don't have the information. As I said, even in the most current census, information about language is not being collected. There's not even a section for when you say other, please specify. That doesn't exist. So there's no space for specifying what that other means. Other means undisclosed, unknown. So if that's the scenario, then it's very difficult to make policy decisions. And creating a Pakistani language or giving shape to what is being used organically by people across the country as the Pakistani language can perhaps be one of the resources we can use to develop national unity.
Thanks, Matt. Can you introduce yourself and ask
Yeah, I'm Mohammed. I'm from University of New South Wales. Then I study linguistics. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Your idea about creating a new language like Pakistani to unite the ethnic groups in Pakistan theoretically seems fine, but what would be the reaction of ethnic groups like Baluch in the east of Pakistan, the north of Pakistan, Iran?
Yeah.
do you believe that they will resist against such an idea, or have you ever assessed your idea practically or not?
I think there might be more of an acceptance by the minority groups than not. I think the most of resistance will probably come with the people who have vested interest in Urdu.
Okay.
People who have a vested interest in Urdu are essentially the elites and the political elites, right? And they maintain their position through language as a way of maintaining access to education and resources, right? And using Urdu as a way of accessing resources means a lot of people who don't speak Urdu or don't speak Urdu well measured by standards that are not local, are excluded. So by opening up this space for talking about Pakistani and not Urdu,
Yeah.
we are actually giving space to those ethnic communities and minority groups to actually have a voice and a recognition in what is a national language, instead of excluding them and not not having them part of the discourse. So, for example, in Balochistan, Balochi is the provincial language, but it isn't really used in anything, right? It isn't used really in education, it isn't used in government. So the only recognition you have is symbolic recognition of the language, and that's just one language within Balochistan. Balochistan has a good 20 plus languages, right? So what about the other languages and the other communities? They have absolutely no voice. So creating a map of what Pakistani is, and seeing the other dialects. Let me give you an example. I think this is a fantastic example. I like to cite here. I mean, I know there are problems with this example, but when you're creating analogies, you have to push aside some of the problems. Think of Chinese. Chinese is seen as a language with many different dialects, right? So you've got Shanghainese, Ningboese, Cantonese, I can list hundreds of them. Now, interestingly, these what are known as dialects are mutually unintelligible.
Yeah.
So a person speaking Shanghainese and Cantonese cannot communicate with each other, even though they're considered dialects of Chinese. Now, that's a very different way of looking at language, right? Where Chinese is the language that we all associate with, even though we might speak a mother tongue or a dialect which is different from somebody else who is also speaking Chinese. So where Chinese symbolically and practically in many ways plays a very strong role in nation building or creating a Chinese consciousness, right? Urdu doesn't, because it plays a divisive role. And it is seen as an imperialistic language, brought in by the elites, the political elites who migrated from British India to what became parts of Pakistan, who came into Lahore, came into Karachi, came into Hyderabad, other cities, took over positions of power, were the bureaucrats, were the political leaders, were the people in power, were the educated people, right? So there's that sense in the communities that actually don't see or accept Urdu. So the local communities, the minority languages, and I think would probably see a much more, they would see much more offering in this idea of a Pakistani than the elite that benefits from the positioning of a particular kind of Urdu.
So what do you think that the same situation like Turkey in 1928 would happen? That they change all the alphabet from Arabic, Persian to Latin.
I don't think that we should change the Latin to Latin alphabet in Pakistan. I don't think we need to have a Roman alphabet. I can see an argument for it. So, for example, if you're doing Facebook Messenger, for example, you can use that script. But now you can get Arab or Persian script on Facebook too. I don't think we need to change I don't think we need to change the script from Persian-Arabic to English, and there are various reasons for it. But what I do think we need to do is simplify the script, right? So there is, we need a script that represents and reflects the sort of way that people spell and speak the language in Pakistan. So the example I was giving earlier, the say, seen, swad,
like Persian, yeah.
right? 3 letters in Urdu that really don't, they're very simple, very similar. There's lots of other examples in Urdu script, right? Which continue to create problems for kids who don't understand, why do you spell it like this when I don't say this sound? Why do you choose this character as opposed to that? Does that create problems in literacy development? I don't know, because there are no studies of this in the context of Pakistan, but it's a question to explore. And that's all I'm saying. Let's create some space to explore this. So you were saying what we need to do. The first thing we need to have is an all-party conference. The second thing we need to have is a result of that all-party conference is to say, let's establish a group that will investigate and report on the linguistic feasibility and challenges of developing something like Pakistan. Now, can language be changed through policy? Absolutely. For example, I'm sort of revealing my age here, but when I was growing up, when I left a conversation or when we were leaving, we would say Khuda Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz was the greeting when you're leaving somebody. It's like goodbye.
Yeah.
But now in Pakistan, pretty much everybody says Allah Hafiz. They do not use Khuda Hafiz. And they don't, in fact, if I use Khuda Hafiz, people will correct me, right? And say, no, this is not what you say. You say Khuda Hafiz. You don't say Khuda Hafiz. You say Allah Hafiz. Where did the change come from? That change came through policy decisions. This came through media, right? It came through a very focused intervention. So policies, if a government decides to make a policy for a certain reason, it can implement it, and those implementations can have an impact, will affect the country and the use of language. The question is, do we have the will, do we have the desire, and do we want to explore options that haven't been explored?
Okay, thanks.
I'm Salim and live in Sydney. My question is, you talked about creating a new language, but at the same time you argued that Urdu was or is a Norwegian language, and even the argument for having Pakistani is that because it evolved within a natural process. So I feel that is there in the contradiction. Creating sounds like something artificially which you design. Region is something natural process. Second, would you like to construct a system, grammar, and like you say, changing alphabets to impose it, or would you rather be happy to recognize Pakistani as a natural evolution of Urdu or organic language of Pakistan, which has a basis, roots from Urdu, but has incorporated elements from the other regional languages? So would it be better just to recognize it as symbolically and then let it grow once it's mature, might have its final stroke?
Let me sort of say this. I think I've said it a few times, but I need to stress it. I'm not saying that we're creating a new language, right? It's not coming out of nowhere. It is actually, Pakistani is a study of language as it is used by the communities as a lingua franca, using that as a study to create resources and material and policy positions in order to achieve, have more benefits of a well thought out language policy. So there's no way I'm saying create a new language. I'm saying expand our understanding of what people are using, as when they say, let's say Urdu as a lingua franca across Pakistan, and using those understandings and studies of Urdu as a lingua franca to create a sense of what Pakistani is. And then using the label Pakistani, which acknowledges variations, which acknowledges regional mother tongue influence variations of the language, which you are saying exist, accepting it, acknowledging the variations, acknowledging the different phonologies, acknowledging the different gender systems, acknowledging the different pronominal systems, right? Recognizing them as features of Urdu, as features of Pakistani, because they're not features of Urdu. We know that. They don't need to be, because what we speak now is Pakistani. And this is the Pakistani language that has evolved organically in the country. It's not a new language. It's a recognition of the organic growth of what Urdu has become in the region. Okay? Because it's no longer Urdu. And that's why people make, say things like, ab ye zaban Urdu-e mohalla nahi hai, balki Urdu-e mohalla hai. Right? So it's not the language of the high Urdu, but it has this, it's the language of the streets. And so it's the variations that we already recognize and are seen in sort of idioms and the way that, for example, comedians work or people making fun of the other dialects. So those are things. It's in a sense what I'm saying is let's recognize it and let's call it Pakistani, and let's think about how this Pakistani language can be utilized to help the communities and the people.
Thanks for that. We're going to take one question from Facebook Live. We have Yasir Hussain who's asking, wouldn't be Pakistani not bound by power struggle itself? And he also extends the question by saying that, how do you see dominant Punjabi-Urdu nexus supported by English giving way to minority language? Would you do that?
Very good question. Very good question, Yasir. In sort of preparing for this particular session, I was just sort of joking with my friends and saying the people who will oppose this very strongly are people from the Urdu Punjabi nexus, who have a privileged position in keeping and they maintain their power through the positioning of Urdu. And in saying, I agree with Yasir. That's definitely a challenge. And that's why we need to think about how we can work through this. Will there be a dominance of Punjabi Urdu communities in the creation of this, in the recognition and establishment of the material on this language? To a degree, yes. Partly because of historical reasons, because Urdu is the base language on which Pakistani has evolved, right? We have to acknowledge the fact that Pakistani as it exists today has its roots in Urdu. Whether that was a good decision, bad decision, let's forget about it. The decision was made at some point and it has led to the creation of Pakistani. So has Urdu influenced it? Yes. Has Punjabi influenced it? Well, if 50% of the population of Pakistan is Punjabi speaking, then obviously Punjabi has influenced it. How are you going to negate the input from the half of your population? So you have to acknowledge that yes, there will be an influence of Punjabi, but there will also be influence of Balochi, Sindhi, Saraiki, all the languages, Brushiski, Shina. Why not? Why not make it more engaging, open to accepting these different variations? And what will the final shape of this language be like? I don't know. I really don't know. But I would like to know, and I would like to explore what it might look like. And I would love to see PhD dissertations coming from Pakistan or anywhere in the world that actually study the use of languages in the country which are not English.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? If not, thank you, Dr. Mahboob, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody who came, and especially people who are watching us live on Facebook. It was a pleasure to have you.